It was really close this time, so I actually wasn't sure if I would be writing about Starflower or Briarlight for a while. The top contenders for these have been really different every time. That said, Longtail has been a popular choice every time until he got through, and Briarlight has been up there a few times too. I'm interested to see what sort of suggestions I get once these more popular cats have faded into the background. Before we start, I should mention that I am not physically disabled. I cannot speak for people who are paralyzed. I am not an authority on ableism. I am a Warrior Cats YouTuber. If you intend to make statements about Briarlight as a character, I encourage you to do more research than simply watching this video. Briarlight is another cat that I don't focus on much in my short videos. I think she's shown up once. This isn't because I dislike her. I love Briarlight, but I don't really want to make her the butt of any jokes. Early on in the Warrior Cats fandom, Briarlight was an easy target for humor and bad taste. Not that Briarlight is incapable of being funny, obviously. She would make a good straight man the same way I use characters like Squirrelflight. On some level, I'm just embarrassed by how I joked about the character 11 years ago now. The relationship between her, Alderheart, and Jayfeather is something that I could unquestionably be expanding into a couple good videos. I just haven't gotten around to it. She works well as a pair with Jayfeather, especially with how spiky and tense he behaves, and she's the total opposite. She's very naturally clever, positive, and charming, while he's blunt, mean, and stoic. And I'm not talking about shipping here, I'm talking about dynamics. They work well. They've got good chemistry when interacting in the books, especially with a third character involved that Briarlight can undermine Jayfeather for. Briarkit is born in Power of Three. She and her siblings, Blossomkit and Bumblekit, are in a bit of a middle. They don't ever share the nursery with Foxkit or Icekit, and they're a bit too young to ever have been part of the big group of apprentices Power of Three carries around. Likewise, they're seen as a bit older than characters like Dovepaw and Ivypaw, and are made warriors in the second book of Omen of the Stars. While Blossomfall is a bit of a bully to Ivypool and Bumblestripe is a love interest for Dovewing, Briarlight never has a substantial relationship with either sister. Luckily, though, we're not just seeing these characters through the lens of Dovepaw and Ivypaw, but also through the somewhere less than a year older Jayfeather and Lionblazes. As a kit, there's an incident where she's targeted by a snake. Honeyfern, who had just previously been discussing her excitement about becoming a mother, sacrifices herself for the kit. This leads to deathberries being put around the camp, which then gives Hollyleaf an excuse to use them to threaten to poison her mother. It's dominoes, don't worry about it. I want to specifically say that this isn't a waste because Briarlight is later paralyzed. Briarlight's life isn't worth less for her disability. All that matters is that Honeyfern saved a life that someone wouldn't have been able to experience otherwise. Briarkit from here on out has a pretty normal childhood. It's notable that she's very quick to respond to dangerous situations, and she's just generally a very happy, excited person. We don't see much of her early training, but we do know that she's pretty unfazed by Thornclaw's stern behavior. This seems to be her general reaction for the rest of her life to negative attitudes. Nobody is raining on her parade. Right around the time that her and her siblings are ready to become warriors, a tree falls on camp. Briarpaw runs in to save Longtail, another example of her acting quickly in dangerous situations, who is going back for food Mousefur was fretting about. Unfortunately, they both get crushed by the branches of the falling tree and Longtail dies, but Briarlight becomes permanently paralyzed and loses the use of her back legs and tail. I went over this from Longtail's perspective a little bit in my last talking video. Millie, her mother, immediately reacts poorly. Although she seems to try and keep a calm face at first, her behavior very quickly deteriorates. For this early point, while she is injured, she's asleep. She just stays asleep for a period of time. We don't even talk to her for a little while. Jayfeather meets with the other medicine cats and is warned by Little Cloud of a similar case, where a Shadow Clan cat had died of chronic chest infections after not being physically strong enough upon becoming paralyzed. This ends up being extremely helpful advice to the unexperienced Jayfeather, and helps him set up a routine of physical activity that helps Briarlight stay healthy for years. Throughout the time immediately following Briarlight's injury, before we really see what Briarlight thinks of any of this, Millie is unhelpful, pushy, and hovering when Jayfeather treats her daughter, and upon learning the details of her daughter's condition, she instantly loses her composure. The scene where she first learns about Briarlight's injury reads as if she's supposed to be having a panic attack. She's noted to be having difficulty breathing, she's yelling and being oddly physical with Jayfeather, and she's kind of ignoring what anyone says to her during that moment. Brightheart scolds her for acting like this in earshot of her kit, and Millie doesn't respond. This behavior unquestionably has a negative effect on Briarpaw, as by the time Jayfeather gets to her, he can feel her panic with his power. Millie doesn't come back in. She stays outside with Graystripe. The person who comforts her in this situation, on Brightheart's suggestion, is Jayfeather. He lies beside her in the closest thing a cat can do to a hug, and he answers her questions. Briarpaw is scared, but her mother's behavior is making her worse. She's paralyzed, but she isn't in any pain. And immediately everyone around her is making it out as if this is the end of the world. Soon, she's given a warrior name alongside her siblings. Jayfeather's treatment to strengthen her works well and quickly, and she's capable of moving herself around camp, even with kittens balancing on top of her. Going forward from this point, Briarlight becomes a permanent part of the medicine den. Story-wise, she's suddenly serving a really important function. She's a foil to Jayfeather. She's someone for him to talk to who's always around, but she's also someone very different from him in attitude. She's less stoic, more trusting, and generally everything he's not in such a way that improves both their characters when they're around each other. And that's something that I really can't say for most cats in this series. She's frequently referred to as being not offended by Jayfeather when he's curt and rude, almost as if to imply everyone else who talks to him is. Briarlight gets sick around the end of Fading Echoes and continues to be sick for a large chunk of Night Whispers. Millie violently confronts Jayfeather again for making Briarlight exercise through her illness. Millie is basically screaming at him and implies that all he's doing is hurting her more by prolonging her life. Which is messed up, by the way. Briarlight isn't dying. She's not in pain from being paralyzed, and although she was frustrated with her exercises at first, she isn't hurting from them or struggling with them. Millie is repeatedly implying that being disabled is worse than being dead, which is awful. It's not true, and it's hurting her daughter to see her mother believing this. She sees it happening. She sees what her mother says and does. It's having a bad effect on her own self-worth. She begins refusing to eat, and she begins feeling guilty that her mother is constantly fretting over her. Jayfeather talks her out of it and gives her some jobs to perform around the medicine den when she implies there's more she wants to do, but Jayfeather doesn't think that Briarlight needs to quote-unquote be useful, but he does know that giving her jobs will help her feel better when words won't. By the time we get to the Forgotten Warrior, she is actively and happily referring to herself as Jayfeather's assistant, and she seems to take pride in it. When he becomes mildly depressed after being accused of murder by Dawnpelt, she assures him, just as he had previously reassured her, and makes him eat when he had been refusing to, just like he had made her to. He tucks her into bed to check her for fever in The Last Hope. I just wanted to tell you this because it's cute and not because it's character relevant. Briarlight maintains a good relationship with Bumblestripe after moving to the medicine den, but after Fading Echoes, Blossomfall isn't shown visiting her for the rest of the arc. And, well, we're still in Omen of the Stars, I guess I should get into that. Well, I think she plays an important role as a character, and occasionally think she's funny in a how can this warrior cat's character be such a stereotypical mean girl sort of way. I don't like Blossomfall as a person, so maybe on some level what I'm about to say about her is a bit tinted by all the other elements of her character that I think make her an absolute mess. In Sign of the Moon, Ivypool finds out that Blossomfall is training in the Dark Forest. Blossomfall is defensive about it and pushes Ivypool away at first, and then they get lost in a hole together. When things are looking dire after Blossomfall's been hit in the head with a rock, she wonders if Millie would miss her if she were dead. This immediately implies to Ivypool that what's driven her to the Dark Forest is that she's not getting as much attention as her sister. Ivypool obviously connects this back to how the Dark Forest cats manipulated her bad relationship with her own family. It also mirrors how they manipulated Breezepelt's bad relationship with his. The Dark Forest cats manipulate cats, in part by exploiting their bad or potentially bad relationships with other people and making them worse. It's a large plot point in Omen of the Stars, and if you haven't read Omen of the Stars before, have you ever seen Miraculous Ladybug? Actually, you know what? I'm not going to go there. You get the idea. I'm just going to read out what Blossomfall says here to not misrepresent her words. Blossomfall hesitated, then shrugged. Maybe Millie loves me when she remembers she has more than one kit. Stretching out one forepaw, she scraped it against the hard stone of the tunnel floor, so violently that Ivypool was surprised she didn't wrench her claws out. I hate myself for feeling jealous of Briarlight, Blossomfall confessed, not looking at Ivypool. I can't bear seeing her suffer, and I know Briarlight would give anything to be better and whole again. It's all so unfair. Scoring her claws across the rock again, she added, "But I can't help what I feel, and that proves I'm not a good cat." "Of course you are," Ivypool exclaimed, shocked. "No. A good cat wouldn't be jealous of an injured littermate, so that's why I ended up in the dark forest." She gave Ivypool a sidelong glance. "I'm not stupid. I know it's where cats go if they're not allowed into StarClan. But I guess I won't get into StarClan either, because I hate my sister for being injured. So the dark forest is where I fit in, and I'm getting good training, better than anything we get here." She took a long, shaking breath and looked around. "Will Hawkfrost come get us, do you think?" Blossomfall explains that she's a bad person because she's jealous of the attention Briarlight gets because of her disability. She knows it's bad of her. She knows Briarlight isn't trying to get Millie's attention. It's quite the opposite, seemingly. But she's putting this on Briarlight anyways. She admits to hating her for it. She also implies that Briarlight is not whole, as if she's incomplete, which is ableist. It's just blatantly ableist, and I don't think Briarlight ever refers to herself that way whatsoever. Blossomfall isn't empathetic towards her sister at all. Just acknowledging that Briarlight goes through suffering is not the same as understanding what the situation is like for her. Especially seeing as almost all of Millie's attention towards Briarlight up until this point has been framed as negative by the books. We are not seeing positive, loving interactions from Millie. We're seeing panicked, frenzied, problematic reactions from her. And my question is, why is she putting this on Briarlight for being injured and not her mother for being a massive jerk? Blossomfall doesn't make up with her sister in Omen of the Stars. In fact, this whole bit goes nowhere. Millie confirms that she's treating Blossomfall with less concern by scolding her for being careless later, so why in the world is Blossomfall making this about her sister and not her mother? Blossomfall acknowledges that her behavior is bad and that she feels bad about it, and instead of doing something to change it or talking to literally anyone about it, she just decides, well, I'm a bad person, actually, can't change that, so I will do nothing about this. Look on the bright side, free trading. Hawkfrost is pretty cute, don't you think? This entire situation, narratively, is used for Ivypool to make her further recognize how the Dark Forest manipulates her clanmates' feelings. It's never really brought up again, except in reference to why Blossomfall might be avoiding her. Unless you count Blossomfall acting clingy with Bumblestripe as her being insecure about her relationships with other characters, but even then it's not really a resolution, it's just a continuation. And you may be wondering to yourself, where is Graystripe during all of this? Why does nobody care or think about Graystripe? Why doesn't Graystripe have any involvement? I have no idea. He shows up once or twice while Millie is panicking, only to go, shh, calm down, dear, or do you really mean that? He calms her down and reasons with her while she's on her furious, nonsensical rants about the value of her daughter's life. But while it's clear that he doesn't share the same sentiments that Millie does, we don't see him clearing that up with Briarlight. We don't see him connecting with Briarlight at all. Graystripe is seen once alone with Briarlight after the initial scene where they learn what happened to her, sharing a sparrow with her and the Forgotten Warrior. And while Millie is terrible, and repeats a harmful rhetoric over and over again, she does help her with her treatment, she helps her with her exercises, and she cares somewhat about her well-being, which Canon Briarlight does seem like she appreciates. So where is Graystripe in this cat's life, even if her terrible, terrible mom is willing to be involved in a way that actually helps? I'm just wondering why he never, ever attended any of her physical therapy, especially when Millie was literally always there. It's just strange. It's not like the guy had a full-time job that was any different than the one Millie had. Especially seeing as most of the time when Graystripe is mentioned in Late Omen of the Stars, it's in relation to Millie. Sharing food with her or being with her, he is super prominent in Millie's random scenes and so incredibly absent in Briarlight's. Likewise, Blossomfall doesn't even mention Graystripe. When she's upset about Millie's attention, it's as if he doesn't even exist. There's no communication between these people and no common sense. Why do we have a struggle for parental attention where one parent doesn't even seem to count? He does mention that he cares about each of them at the end of Bramblestar's Storm while he's retiring, along with watching Briarlight do a backflip or something with Millie while they gaze proudly at her, but at that point it's a little bit too late for Omen of the Stars plot threads. But whatever. I do regret that I have to spend so much time talking about characters that aren't Briarlight in a video about Briarlight. It's just that the books are written in such a way that it's impossible to separate her from everyone else constantly reacting to her. Before I move on past Omen of the Stars, I do want to give a summary of what Briarlight is like in Omen of the Stars. Like I said before, as an apprentice, she's reckless, she's risk-taking, and she is very, very positive and happy. After becoming paralyzed, Briarlight does not become less positive or less happy. She does very suddenly start struggling with self-worth issues. This is something that Jayfeather as a character is very actively pushing against, and Millie as a character is definitely reinforcing. She internally feels the need to have a purpose, have a job, have something to do. She is not looking for anything grand. She really just wants to be able to help. She wants to feel like she's contributing. She doesn't like being treated as if she's fragile, especially when she's around kittens. People tend to assume that the kittens are going to hurt her, and she knows that the kittens will not. Throughout the series, this actually comes up more than once. It's kittens like, yeah, we're gonna play with Briarlight, and Briarlight's like, yeah, I'm gonna play with kittens, and then somebody else is like, oh, don't hurt her, and she's like, okay, I legitimately forgot that I'm not supposed to swear in these just then. This segment is unscripted because I felt like I didn't give a good summary in my script, so... so I start swearing, of course I do. Professional YouTuber Moon Kitty. Another element of Briarlight's character that isn't really commonly brought up is that she loves gossip and drama and to know what's going on all the time. I'm not really sure if this was intended more so than just a convenience of the plot over and over again, but it gets frustrating for Jayfeather, who sends her out of the den more than once to keep up his silly secrets with his brother. Anyways, I guess I'll move on to the later books. In Dovewing's Silence, Briarlight is mentioned to go on walks in the forest now. After Hazeltail gets sick with a cough, Briarlight also decides on her own, well, mostly decides on her own, that she doesn't need to sleep in the medicine den anymore. When she suggests being moved to the warrior's den, she's redirected to the elder's den due to crowding, which she is very disappointed by. Dovewing notices this and offers to sleep in the elder's den with Purdy instead until the second warrior's den is done being constructed. Don't ask me about the concept of the second warrior's den. I'm pretty sure it only shows up in Dovewing's Silence. I could be completely wrong, but I'm under the impression that it's something that's introduced in Dovewing's Silence, maybe implied in Bramblestar's Storm, and then completely forgotten about in A Vision of Shadows. She insists to everyone that she'll be useful to them, which, again, she doesn't need to be. She doesn't need to be saying this, and she shouldn't have to. Oh, also, Millie is minorly terrible and pushy in the one scene she has with Briarlight in this book, too, just so you know. In the gap between Dovewing's Silence and Bramblestar's Storm, Briarlight has caught green cough anyways. Everyone's pampering her in the wake of it, and she is sick of it. During the storms, Millie anticipates Briarlight being anxious about trees, and Bramblestar invites her to sleep in the leader's den to feel safe. He leaves her with Millie and goes and sleeps in the warrior's den when she does. No sleepovers with Millie for Bramblestar. Even though Bramblestar comments that Millie is kind of anxious about this and seems more upset about it than Briarlight does, Millie's intuition about how Briarlight will feel is actually correct in this situation, which is just, you know, I guess it's something worth pointing out. So, storms make Briarlight have anxiety. The idea of falling trees makes Briarlight have anxiety, and that's completely reasonable of her. There's some silly business saving her from the flood later. The cats can apparently tie her with ivy to keep her on a branch. Don't ask me. The whole scene is really just not character relevant. It's, yeah, we're gonna save Briarlight now, and they do. They save Briarlight. Later on, Briarlight keeps the fact that she's developing sores, which are from sleeping on wet rocks from Jayfeather, so as to not bother him. This isn't the first or last time she's done this sort of thing, not wanting to trouble others with her problems and therefore not telling them. I really want to blame this behavior on Millie. She never should have implied on any level that her daughter's life is worth less than others. There's really no way that Briarlight didn't internalize this sort of thing. She literally does everything possible to hide her problems to seem like less of a bother, and she doesn't need to. She shouldn't need to. The way that the rest of the clan talks about her and treats her doesn't help either, but I feel like Millie's definitely the root of the problem. It really doesn't help that this scene is immediately followed by the kitty pet Minty going, "Whoa, you actually care about disabled people? I guess you are civilized out here." Briarlight also, off-screen from here, gets some white cough. Dry bedding becomes a must, mostly with the intention of saving Briarlight from her chest infection, so they go on a big long adventure to steal some blankets from Two Legs. She recovers from this point on, and seems to have moved back to the medicine den again. There's a moment where Bramblestar and sees Jayfeather and thinks that he's happily bossing her around, her being Briarlight. Millie isn't nearly as bad as she was in Omen of the Stars in this book, as her attitude about Briarlight's disability changes pretty significantly. She still frets over her daughter way too much, but she's putting her down not quite as much in her language, and it doesn't have any panicking outbursts like she did constantly in Omen of the Stars, nor does she act violent and demanding about it, like she does in Dovewing Silence. Her worried attitude plays out in gentler reminders and less random yelling. I'm not saying that Millie redeemed herself, obviously, just that she's significantly toned down in Bramblestar Storm, and presented as being gentler and more patient about her fussing, which doesn't go away. But Briarlight really shines in the Vision of Shadows series, despite having a lot less screen time overall. By this point, she no longer is being constantly coddled by her mother, who was in the Elder's Den and scarcely mentioned at all, and she's very, very comfortable with her role in the Medicine Den. She hasn't moved to the Warrior's Den, but I do think that this is an issue of the writing team, changing between these two books. She saves Alderpaw a lot with his various anxieties. She even helps him cheat at tests. She encourages him when he's having trouble. She seems like she's been allowed to grow into an adult, although she's still very capable of silliness. She's kind of like a much older sister character to Alderpaw. And this may have just been the new team's interpretation of the character, but I really liked it. She also has a couple scenes where she entertains Twigkit early on, which are cute. Jayfeather has her wrap around Twigkit when she's cold, but that only lasts a minute before Alderheart replaces her. Alderheart, he's good with kittens in general. This note is more about Twigbranch than Briarlight, but the whole Medicine Cat Den kind of acts like a second set of parents to Twigbranch, which is cute. Briarlight is shown to be invested in her sister's newborn kits in Shattered Sky. I don't think that Briarlight was ever aware of Blossom Fall's feelings about her. She even memorizes all of their names before she meets them. She still does her exercises all throughout a Vision of Shadows, but usually her helper is Leafpool, Jayfeather, a Kit, or Alderheart. Millie is nowhere to be seen. There's a cute scene where, when there's the sound of a fight outside, she says to Alderheart, "Go on, go and find out what's happening, and then come and tell me about it." She's playfully teasing towards the Medicine Cats, even Leafpool, who she remarks is getting slower as they run laps around the camp as one of her exercises. So throughout the first half of A Vision of Shadows, she's just very charming, very smug. She's kind of got this new heh attitude about her. But then we get to River of Fire, and River of Fire is the Warrior Cats book where Briarlight dies. On the first mention of illness spreading through camp, Briarlight says not to worry about her. She even hisses at Bumblestripe to tell him to stop fretting over her, insisting that she doesn't need to be taken care of. They ignore her protests, and they move her to the nursery to avoid the sick cats. This is where we have, I think, the first on-screen conversation between Blossomfall and Briarlight in a long, long time. Briarlight plays with 3 out of her sister's 4 terrible children, which seems to lift her spirits. Meanwhile, the whole camp is seeming like they're getting sick. Soon after, Alderheart smells the sickness on her. She insists, like she always has, that she didn't want to bother him, that she hoped it was just something that she ate. Alderheart says to her nearly the same thing that Jayfeather did in a book years before, that he is a medicine cat and he is there to be bothered. The only point at which she could have caught the sickness was from Jayfeather, who had come into the nursery with the illness to deliver Ivypool's kits. This distresses Jayfeather. Briarlight's condition deteriorates quickly, and she again insists that she didn't tell anyone as to not bother them. Jayfeather is immediately in denial. He loses his composure more than we have ever seen him do before. Alderheart notices that Briarlight also hadn't been taking enough to eat. While she is dying, it's the only time we see Millie with her in A Vision of Shadows. Even while she's dying, Briarlight seeks to reassure everyone around her. Graystripe speaks for Millie at her funeral. Jayfeather tries to say something, but he's unable to, and Alderheart finishes his sentence. This is one of the most emotional deaths in Warrior Cats for me, largely because of how it affects Jayfeather. He's normally a very stoic character, but he's more emotional about Briarlight's death than he was about Hollyleaf's. It destroys him. Now, I am not paralyzed. I can't talk for how good or bad the representation of Briarlight as a paralyzed character is. But I really just want to drill in that usefulness does not determine worth, no matter what capitalism or Warrior Cats wants to imply. Hell, Warrior Cats doesn't even want to imply that, but they sure aren't doing a good job of it when Briarlight continually hides her problems to seem smaller, to be less of a problem for the people around her. There's a scene from Night Whispers that I went over very briefly. Briarlight is refusing to eat for Millie. She claims that she isn't hungry. Jayfeather uses his powers to find out no, Briarlight is totally hungry. When pressed about it, Briarlight says, "I don't hunt, I shouldn't eat." "Daisy doesn't hunt," Jayfeather pointed out. "Should she starve?" "She looks after the kids," Briarlight grunted. "What about when you keep them amused by playing moss ball while Daisy rests?" "Any cat could do that." "What about Purdy and Mousefur then? They don't hunt." "They're old, they've hunted enough for the clan. But they can't hunt anymore. Why don't we let them die now?" And so, immediately she responds with, "We couldn't. They're part of the clan. It's our duty to look after them. Besides, the clan wouldn't be the same without them." And Jayfeather responds with, "Do you think the clan would be the same without you?" And again, I feel like it's no wonder that she feels like this with the way that her mother acts, with the way that the people in the clans treat her disability. I guess I wish it was just drilled in a little bit more that this wasn't correct. Briarlight doesn't need to prove that she deserves to exist. She feels the need to because her society very greatly values the contributions of the individual, but also because of the way people treat her, especially her mother. Something unrelated that I want to note is that something I see on social media a lot is pictures of paralyzed cats scooting across rugs and speeding around for their dinners, and then they're captioned with, "Look, it's Briarlight, see?" But, if or not real domesticated cats get along fine without the use of their back legs isn't something that went unaddressed in Briarlight's story. If you actually read the books, by A Vision of Shadows, she is extremely mobile inside the camp, and she's going for walks outside of the camp with Daisy, and she's running laps as an exercise with Leafpool. If or not she's strong and capable of being mobile doesn't mean it's a good idea for her to be a warrior, though. And let me clarify, she is a warrior. She technically is a warrior cat. She doesn't do warrior cat duties because they're dangerous for her. A reoccurring worry about Briarlight's health is that if she's nicked by a thorn or cut in some way, she's not going to notice the wound. The books know she's capable of being pretty fast, but it's probably not a good idea for her to be sliding around across brambles and sharp sticks and other things you find scattered around in the woods. If she gets hurt in her hindquarters, she is at seriously increased risk of infection. And even if she's fast, Briarlight doesn't have the same mobility as other cats. She can't pounce, stalk, or jump, and while a cat with her physical limitations might be able to catch prey occasionally anyways, there's no reason to make her do something like that when it would possibly endanger her physically. Again, she doesn't need to be quote-unquote useful. She doesn't need to be contributing anything. Briarlight's worth as a person isn't in question by the people around her. And in part, her self-punishing behavior, again, really feels like Millie's fault. While people complain about Millie, they immediately turn to how she treated Blossomfall. For some reason, it's always straight to Blossomfall. And sure, she was curt with Blossomfall. She didn't treat her with much sympathy. She scolded her for getting hurt/lost, and everyone watching was like, "Geez, ouch, how painful to see." But it's not even close to how bad Briarlight has it. And what Blossomfall is jealous of is how bad Briarlight has it. I struggle to connect with an adult Blossomfall who feels jealous of her disabled sister. Briarlight's mother is constantly screaming about her, making a big scene in camp about how terrible it is her daughter can't hunt or have babies now. And the idea that Blossomfall feels jealous of that sort of attention is doing so without an awareness of how harmful that behavior is. Likewise, I don't feel sympathy for a Blossomfall who's jealous that her mother worried about and helps her disabled sister with physical therapy. You could be helping your sister with physical therapy, Blossomfall. You could be right there with them. Whitewing was, and she was just your mom's nursery friend. Like, if you want attention from your mother, have you considered actually spending time with her? We know that Blossomfall is being manipulated by the Dark Forest to think the way she does about the situation, and to think that she's beyond help or evil or beyond changing. There's no way that she thinks she belongs in the Dark Forest for her feelings without that kind of manipulation, and I'm sure the Dark Forest reinforced a lot of her most negative thoughts, just like it did to Ivypool, just like it did to Breezepelt. The Dark Forest acted as if they were an abusive partner, attempting to emotionally distance the trainees, manipulate them into believing worse and worse things about their family and clan to isolate them. That was their plan, that was how they operated. It's the plot of Omen of the Stars. But Millie is eternally more harmful to Briarlight than she is to Blossomfall, and Blossomfall is nearly as bad as Millie when she thinks of her sister. Blossomfall doesn't resolve any of her problems and isn't shown to take any steps to improve. She just wants to wallow in self-pity and say, "I'm a bad person, that's just who I am, I can't change." And I'm not saying that because Blossomfall doesn't have it as bad that she's not also suffering from abusive behavior. I'm saying that Blossomfall is self-centered and making her sister's problems about herself in a way that makes her unsympathetic to me. Maybe after the whole Dark Forest thing, Blossomfall realized that she was being manipulated by them and changed her behavior and the way that she thought about her sister. But that doesn't change the fact that she's not shown anywhere near her until she's a mother in a vision of shadows and Millie is retired. And I like Blossomfall. I don't like her as a person. As a person, I cannot stand her, but as a character, I like her. She's mean. She has an important role to play in the Omen of the Stars cast. She spends the whole series as a mean girl in an 80s high school movie, bullying weirdo Ivypool just to break down in the bathroom during prom and spill all her thoughts to her, showing a human side to herself before going right back to being a jerk again next time we see her. My other problem with Blossomfall is that I can't really see her as a child. An older teenager maybe, a senior in high school maybe, but she's an adult. She isn't under Millie's care anymore, or really that dependent on her. She's not alone in the world. She's got her brother, she's got her father, she's got her mentor and her clanmates and her friend Rose Petal. And as an adult who isn't dependent on her mother for anything at all, why is she targeting her sister? Why does she hate Briarlight? Her appraisal of the situation as an independent adult woman that her sister is to blame for her mother's behavior is unquestionably weird. Also, she goes on to say some really suspicious things about Dovewing and Bramble Starstorm, and she also becomes one of the most xenophobic cats in ThunderClan together with Thornclaw Forever, but those notes are besides the point. I would love to have made a video about Briarlight without constantly discussing Millie, without constantly discussing Blossomfall, but you can't. You just can't talk about them separately because it's almost never separate until A Vision of Shadows. And like I said earlier, Millie's behavior resembles her having breakdowns. There's a panic in her behavior. There's a one-track mindness of her outbursts that are telling of this, and she's just very clearly not well, especially considering the way all the other characters react when she's acting poorly. The way she lashes out at Blossomfall also reads more like mental illness than it does her being a jerk, but that doesn't mean the effects of her behavior on her daughters are any less harmful, and that kind of message should never be going unchallenged by anyone. And even without what Millie is specifically saying, Millie just freaking out about this is harmful. Acting like the world is ending when your daughter, listening from inside the medicine den, doesn't even know what's wrong yet. Even if she hadn't said all of the terrible ableist garbage that she did, she was still acting in a way that would hurt her daughter. Canonically, Briarlight did not need to prove herself to anyone. Even though she struggled with people coddling her and feeling sorry for her, nobody expected her to be more than she was. She was busy. She did a lot of helping, be it cleaning the warrior's nest in Dovewing Silence or being an assistant to Jay Feather with his duties in Omen of the Stars until Leafpool returned to the medicine den. But she didn't do these things because anyone expected her to. She did them because she wanted to, which is better than the alternative. Millie stops being overbearing in A Vision of Shadows when she goes to the Elder's Den. This series takes place about 18 moons after Omen of the Stars, if I remember correctly. It could be a little fuzzy there. Either way, it's probably just the difference in writing team, as a lot of Omen of the Stars staples didn't carry over to A Vision of Shadows. Even plot points that are set up to be future threads in later series didn't pan out. There is an opportunity here to say, oh, maybe Millie stopped being so terrible about her daughter's disability, maybe they had a conversation, but canonically, as far as we know, nothing changed except for Millie getting too old to fret anymore. In Starkland, just as she promised her mother, Briarlight has use of her legs again. This is really concerning when coupled with the earlier book sentiment that cats appearing in Starkland are as they were happiest. That said, the new team, much like how they missed out on several elements of Starkland lore from Omen of the Stars, probably didn't even know this. Then again, they did have this really truly horrible line-in where Sandstorm attempts to tell her daughter Squirrelflight to let herself die lest she ends up like Briarlight, which is, again, that same awful sentiment that a cat is better off dead than disabled. But when contacted about this line, we were promised that future prints of Squirrelflight's Hope would have it removed. We're still not sure if that's happened. Actually, if you have like a soft cover version of Squirrelflight's Hope and you want to peek and see if that line is still there, tell me in the comments. And I guess I can't end this without explaining, well, a bit of an elephant in the room that we learned about a little while back. Briarlight was initially intended to die from her injuries during Omen of the Stars, and she didn't because, well, let me just get the portion of the article because it would be easier than me rephrasing it. Victoria Holmes says, for the website article Unexpected Storylines, finally, I could go on for ages, but I'll stick to the edited highlights for today. I have a terrible confession to make. Briarlight was never meant to survive being crushed by a fallen tree. I wanted to show her struggling to survive, her clanmates rallying around her, but realistically, and I can see you rolling your eyes from here, warriors? Realistic? A paralyzed cat would not live for long in the wild. Too many internal complications, too much risk of infection, just not compatible with life. Poor little Briarlight. Even as the tree fell, there were tears in my eyes. And then something extraordinary happened. Literally, as I was writing Briarlight's early story, my lovely cousin Dan broke his neck in 3 places while doing charity work in Colombia. For weeks, his life hung in the balance. He was completely paralyzed, unable to breathe for himself, riddled with infection. He was flown back to the UK after 2 months, and we braced ourselves for the worst. Meanwhile, I couldn't help thinking that I had written him into the story, that by crushing Briarlight's spine, I had created a reality for my beloved cousin. So Briarlight had to live. I spent days with Dan, watching the magnificent team of surgeons and physiotherapists work on his poor broken body. The techniques they used to restore his strength in his chest, I gave to Jayfeather, so that he made Briarlight cough and massaged her muscles. Against all expectations, Dan started to breathe on his own. Briarlight got stronger. Dan left hospital for residential unit for long-term rehabilitation. Briarlight moved out of the medicine cat's den. Dan carried the Olympic torch through his hometown in recognition of his extraordinary courage. Briarlight, well, not quite. Dan didn't make a miraculous recovery, and nor did Briarlight. They both showed so much spiritual strength, so much good humor, so much patience, and so much breathtaking bravery in adjusting to their very different circumstances. Though paralyzed, Dan lived in every sense of the word, and continues to have an amazing life. Having set up his own charity in Colombia that helps hundreds of disadvantaged young people every year. Briarlight became as valued a member of her clan as any warrior, kind and respected and equally worthy of emotional development. And for as long as she was my responsibility, she stayed fit and healthy. I know she's in StarClan now, but I'm pleased to report that Dan is alive and well. Briarlight represented something personal to Vicky, and she kept her alive for that reason. I do not think the new team killed off Briarlight knowing this. I can't imagine they did. While it may be extremely personal for Vicky, I don't think she would be the type to leave a note that says, "Don't kill Briarlight for this sentimental reason." Warrior Cats wasn't hers anymore, and if she still had any control over it at all, they probably would have followed the plot threads that she set up in Delving Silence and remembered characters from Bramblestar's Storm. Now, I don't know why Briarlight died in a vision of shadows. I don't know what the goal was. I can explain Honeyfern's death fine, but Briarlight dying led to very little story-wise, aside from Velvet comforting Alderheart, which probably would have happened regardless. It really well could have been that she was killed off to make room in the medicine den, but this also doesn't make sense, as she was intended to move to the Warrior's Den, or Second Warrior's Den, beforehand, and only stay in the medicine den when she was sick. But that was also something from Delving Silence, a book gone very unread by the new team, but a book or two later Leafpool's dead too, leaving just Alderheart and Jayfeather in there, so it really feels like it didn't really need to happen for any reason at all. Either way, I love Briarlight. She made the medicine den so much more of an interesting, enjoyable place when reading. The segments that take place there are dull without her. They feel like there's something missing from the scene. Jayfeather loses a lot of charm without her to balance him out, and he seems 700 times as miserable as he used to be. She was one funny, charming person in a room of completely stoic, socially awkward people, and yes, I'm including Leafpool in that sentence. Every time we're in the medicine den nowadays, I'm just thinking to myself, gee, I wish Flipclaw would come in and start bothering Jayfeather. This ended up a lot longer than I anticipated. I really wanted these talking videos to be something that I could throw together quickly and really just use my surface level knowledge of Warrior Cats to talk about. Obviously, you'll notice that I wasn't quite as limited in this one, and it's really because some cats, there isn't a lot you can do on a surface level to talk about them. There wasn't anything that I wanted to overlook with Briarlight, and I also needed to go over the other people in Briarlight's life who definitely negatively affect her. I did consider as I was making this that I really shouldn't be working on a video about Briarlight if it was going to last 40 minutes of me constantly punching Millie in the face, but it wouldn't have been fair to me to skip over this one just because it would end up being more work. That said, you might have noticed that the images in this are a little bit more sparse than usual, and that's because I am still recording this the day before I need to post it. Oh. Anyways, please put your suggestions for the next cat you want me to talk about in the comments, and the one that gets the most upvotes, assuming that you haven't won this before, will be the subject of the next talking video. I will see you again in like 2 weeks or maybe longer, who knows. And when I say see you again in 2 weeks or maybe longer, I mean see you again for one of these talking videos. I'm probably still going to have a video next week. Who knows what it'll be, though?